A royal courier was seen entering Buckingham Palace in the early hours of the morning. Moments later, murmurs erupted through the corridors. A private document had surfaced, one that carried the power to upend generations of royal planning. The ink was fresh, the name signed in silence. Charlotte, not Camilla, not her bloodline. A secret had just cracked the monarchy wide open. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Inside the palace, tension thickened like fog. The document hadn't been expected, nor had it gone through the usual ceremonial channels. It arrived in a locked briefcase, escorted by two unnamed security officers, whose faces were unfamiliar even to the most seasoned palace staff. Within minutes, private council members were summoned. Phones were confiscated, doors were sealed. The signature on the bottom of the page, King Charles himself. But it wasn't the signature that rattled the monarchy to its core, it was the name it endorsed. Not a royal spouse, not a cousin in line by heritage, but a child, Princess Charlotte. Positioned not as a symbolic figurehead, but as a definitive cornerstone in the future framework of the crown. One line, buried deep in the document, stated, "Let her carry the weight, for she is the flame that must not go out." Gag orders were swiftly imposed on palace aides. Those caught whispering about its contents were relocated or temporarily suspended. The gravity of the document wasn't just legal, it was emotional, political, and deeply personal. Camilla's lineage, once assumed to hold sway in succession planning through quiet influence, was nowhere in the document. Not once. Not a footnote. What had once been treated as a mere technicality in future planning had now become a direct dismissal. This wasn't a ceremonial adjustment. It was a coup on paper, perhaps, but with enough force to redraw loyalties, obligations, and generations of silent promises. What stunned even the most jaded insiders was the timing. This shift wasn't born out of public demand or political convenience. Insiders revealed that the document was conceived during a private health crisis involving the king, a quiet episode never disclosed to the press. It was during this vulnerable chapter that Charles, facing his own mortality, reportedly reviewed private diaries, old letters from his mother, and even an undisclosed recording from Princess Diana. The outcome was not just a revision, it was a revelation. And its message was clear. The future must not be defined by tradition alone, but by character, stability, and the ability to endure. It was no coincidence that Princess Anne was allegedly the first royal to lay eyes on the document. Her face, as described by a senior chamberlain, changed visibly upon reading it. Yet, she said nothing. No counsel, no challenge, just a nod. That silence rippled through the palace halls like thunder without lightning. If Anne, arguably the most duty-bound and forthright member of the senior royal circle, offered no protest, then something seismic had shifted behind closed doors. Those watching understood. This wasn't just about succession. It was about preparing the monarchy for a post-Camilla world. And while the public remained unaware of the storm brewing within royal walls, insiders knew the impact would be irreversible. Generations of hierarchy and assumptions were collapsing beneath the surface, and this collapse hadn't come with fanfare, but with a sealed envelope and a single name, Charlotte. But what does this document truly contain, and who was behind its carefully orchestrated unveiling? She never raised her voice, she never issued public statements. Yet behind palace doors, Catherine of Wales was maneuvering like a chess master. This wasn't just about titles, it was about legacy. A mother who saw the future her daughter deserved and dared to challenge a system that overlooked her. In a world where every gesture is scrutinized and every word dissected, Catherine learned early on that true power doesn't speak, it listens, calculates, waits. While others fought for visibility, Catherine embraced invisibility. She embedded herself in duty, in motherhood, in the everyday rituals of royal life, all the while building something no one could see coming. Behind closed doors, her intentions were never loud, but they were unwavering. Her daughter, Charlotte, was not born to simply adorn the palace balcony. She was being prepared, deliberately and methodically, for something far greater. Those close to Catherine spoke of quiet mornings where she would walk the palace halls with Charlotte, not as a royal training exercise, but as a lesson in restraint, observation, and presence. She taught her daughter not just how to wave or curtsy, but how to read a room, how to endure without yielding. There were tears, 2 moments where the weight of expectation bore down like a crown too large for a child's head. Catherine carried it for her, shielded her, not from responsibility but from those who would distort it. This wasn't grooming, it was guarding a flame from wind too bitter to comprehend the fire it threatened to extinguish. Behind the warmth of public images, tensions simmered with Camilla's circle. Whispers of resentment, of unseen battles over influence, began to drift through the palace. Camilla's presence was no longer the only one felt in private briefings and strategic meetings. Catherine, though unofficial in title, was increasingly treated as the quiet center of royal decision-making. And with every polite nod, every diplomatic deflection, she was rewriting the rules. She didn't need to confront Camilla. Her presence was confrontation enough, polished, composed, and unshakably in control. What few know is how this control extended beyond palace gates. In the dead of winter, Catherine was seen slipping into a private chamber with Princess Anne and Prince Edward, no aides, no press, no protocols. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. No minutes were recorded. But something changed after that night. Shifts in scheduling, invitations quietly retracted, a change in tone, in seniority. What Catherine discussed that evening remains sealed in silence. But for those watching, it was a pivotal moment that suggested not just rising influence, but emerging dominance. It wasn't always strategy, sometimes it was heartbreak. Queen Elizabeth, in her final years, had reportedly grown close to Catherine, calling her the quiet pillar. During one of their last private audiences, the Queen is said to have held Charlotte's hand and whispered something that made the young girl's eyes widen. Catherine, watching from a distance, knew that legacy was not written in blood alone but in belief, and the Queen believed in Charlotte. That belief, Catherine would later confide to a friend, gave her permission to begin laying the final pieces of her plan. But the moment that changed everything came not from Catherine but from Charlotte herself. It was a simple hallway, a forgotten door left ajar, and 2 senior royals speaking candidly about Camilla's line and the need for a clean break. Charlotte, barely 10, stood still as stone, listening not with fear but with startling focus. Later that evening, she asked her mother if the crown always went to those who wanted it, or if it could go to someone ready for it. Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The preparation was complete. The girl was no longer waiting to be chosen, she was becoming undeniable. But while Catherine moved in whispers, someone else was watching everything unfold, and her silence was about to break. For decades, Camilla's family believed they were ascending the royal mountain. Now, with a single document, that mountain has crumbled beneath their feet, and as the walls close in, a web of past entitlements and private resentments threaten to boil over. From the moment Charles ascended the throne, Camilla's family stood taller, shoulders squared, eyes forward, as if the future was already written in gold. Titles, trust funds, ceremonial roles, each move, seemed to confirm the quiet promise that Camilla's bloodline would continue its climb. But that illusion shattered the instant Charlotte's name appeared on a private succession document, pushing their claims into the shadows. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a deliberate redirection of royal focus, a line drawn between heritage and heart. The royal establishment had spoken, and it had chosen a child over an entire lineage. The friction didn't begin with the document. It had been building silently for years. Behind palace curtains, Camilla's children, Tom and Laura, never fully meshed with William's family. There were awkward silences at formal events, glances that lingered too long, and decisions about precedents that felt more like provocations. What once could be dismissed as formality became personal when key privileges were quietly withheld and invitations were selectively distributed. Staff close to the household whispered of moments when Camilla questioned why her family continued to be treated as outsiders in a castle they helped to occupy. The line between inclusion and obligation had never been thinner or sharper. Then came the leaks. Letters never meant for public eyes surfaced in coded fragments. Allegedly penned by Camilla herself, they revealed a deeper frustration than many suspected. One phrase in particular ignited speculation. "The Middleton grip tightens with every royal breath we take." The words weren't just bitter. They were wounded. Camilla, once crowned beside the king, was feeling eclipsed by a woman who never demanded power but commanded it effortlessly. And worse, it was Catherine's child, not hers, who had now been positioned to define the monarchy's next chapter. The public, too, had made its preference clear. Polls showed rising affection for Charlotte, her poise, her charm, her resemblance to the late Queen. In contrast, Camilla's family remained an enigma to most citizens, barely visible yet impossible to ignore. As the crown leaned into modernity, it wasn't just about bloodlines anymore, it was about public perception, emotional resonance, and the face people wanted to see represent them in the decades ahead. And increasingly, that face belonged to Charlotte. In the cold corridors of the palace, trust decayed silently. Camilla and Catherine had once exchanged cordial smiles, but that warmth had turned to frost. Meetings became shorter. Eye contact evaporated. And while no public confrontation ever occurred, insiders described the dynamic as an unspoken Cold War. Two matriarchs, two visions, one crown, and now, only one legacy was moving forward. In a last-ditch attempt to reclaim footing, Camilla reportedly retreated to a private estate in Scotland with close advisors. There, away from flashing cameras and royal handlers, she is said to have explored the idea of stepping back from certain ceremonial duties. Not an abdication yet, but a withdrawal. A recognition that the tide had shifted, and that perhaps, despite her efforts, the palace walls were closing in. But this wasn't just a power struggle, it was about legacy. And the next royal chess piece was ready to make a move no one saw coming. Known for her stoic devotion to duty, Princess Anne never played favourites until now. When handed the document that could redefine royal succession, she didn't hesitate. Her response was clear, deliberate, and utterly shocking. Then it must be Charlotte. For most of her life, Princess Anne had been the monarchy's iron spine, unyielding, unshaken, unwavering. She wore discipline like armour and dismissed sentiment as distraction. While others courted public approval or jockeyed for influence, Anne remained behind the scenes, holding the institution together with grit and principle. But when the succession document reached her hands, something shifted. Those closest to her said the room fell silent as she read. No furrowed brow, no raised voice, just a long, still pause, and then that one definitive line. She didn't blink. She didn't ask questions. She knew exactly what the crown required. The change didn't come out of nowhere. Over the years, Anne had grown increasingly disillusioned with the palace's attempt to balance legacy with popularity. Camilla's rise had once been necessary, strategic, even, but now Anne saw it for what it had become. A reign padded with ceremony and absent of substance. She had tolerated it, respected the crown's decision, but she never truly embraced it. And behind that cool exterior was a woman who knew that loyalty to the monarchy sometimes meant going against the ones who wore it. It was her bond with Charlotte that revealed the cracks in her armour. The two were often seen together during quieter moments, Charlotte asking questions most adults wouldn't dare, and Anne answering with blunt honesty. There was no patronising, no soft edges, just truth and mutual recognition. Anne didn't see a child. She saw someone who bore the same spark the late Queen once carried, a quiet certainty, a gravity beyond her years. Charlotte reminded her of the woman who once led the empire through crisis after crisis with nothing but steadiness and restraint. And in Charlotte's silence, Anne found a mirror of herself. The tipping point came behind closed doors. An argument with King Charles so intense that staff reportedly heard raised voices and a door slam with historic force. According to palace whispers, Anne confronted her brother directly. She questioned whether the institution would survive if it continued rewarding comfort over courage. And when Charles defended Camilla's position, Anne's retort stunned him into silence. "Then you're not protecting the crown, you're protecting guilt." After that moment, she distanced herself from Camilla entirely and began advising those who were quietly steering Charlotte's future. It was also Anne who arranged an unscheduled visit to the royal archives, taking Charlotte alone. They spent over 2 hours walking the old corridors where portraits of monarchs hung in stoic silence. At one point, Anne reportedly paused before a sealed chest belonging to Queen Elizabeth II and whispered, "This is what she left us. Not jewels, not titles, but expectations." It was then, say insiders, that Anne truly made her choice. Those close to the drafting of the succession document now admit, in private, that Anne's hand may have influenced its language, not by decree, but by legacy. Her suggestions, her edits, her deep understanding of what the crown truly stood for, these imprints were said to shape the final version. It wasn't about controlling the future, it was about preserving it, and Anne, more than anyone else, knew the difference. But Anne wasn't the only royal grappling with the weight of this decision. The monarch himself was facing the ultimate reckoning. In the early hours, after dismissing his advisors, King Charles sat alone. A journal entry later leaked captured his state of mind. The crown must outlive the ego, and sometimes the past must be surrendered to protect the future. It had been weeks since the document had been drafted, but the final signature, the one that mattered, remained absent. The palace waited. So did the nation. But it was the king who wrestled with ghosts no one else could see. He was not simply deciding the next chapter of the monarchy. He was confronting every shadow that had followed him since the crown passed into his hands. In private, those closest to him revealed a man torn between two lives, the father who wanted peace, and the monarch who knew peace often came at the cost of comfort. For Charles, that cost had a name, and it was Camilla. More than once, he asked his most trusted confidants the same question: "What image survives when I'm gone?" The crown had always been bigger than the man who wore it. But he feared what that crown might come to symbolize if it remained tied to the controversies of his past. He had hoped time would quiet the old wounds, the divorces, the scandals, the public rejection of his choices. But time had done something else instead. She reminded him of Diana, not in appearance but in energy. That disarming grace, the natural poise, the innate understanding of presence. Charles couldn't deny the resemblance, and at times it haunted him. There were moments, he confessed, when Charlotte looked at him, and it felt like unfinished forgiveness was staring back. The guilt lingered. The promises once made and broken loomed larger than ever. And in this child, born of a new era but shaped by the old, Charles saw the rare chance to do something he had rarely done as king: make amends. Still, he feared the backlash. A move like this, elevating Charlotte's role over Camilla's bloodline, would be seen by some as betrayal, by others as weakness. And yet, there was also clarity in the silence of that night. As the wind howled beyond the palace windows and the halls echoed with stillness, Charles called for a bishop, not to seek advice, but to confess. The conversation was short, but the turning point came when he reportedly asked, "Does duty ever demand disloyalty?" The bishop replied only, "Not disloyalty, courage." And with that, the king made his choice. He reached for a pen kept in a red velvet box, one rumoured to have belonged to Queen Elizabeth herself, reserved for moments of historical weight. Charles signed the document slowly, deliberately, not as a father, nor as a husband, but as a monarch who had finally chosen legacy over loyalty. He closed the file, and the weight didn't lift. But he had made peace with it. Because in the end, he knew history would not remember his hesitation. It would remember his decision. But as the monarch sealed his decision in ink, a storm brewed within palace walls, one that would not go quietly. When the document leaked, it wasn't an accident. Inside the palace, trusted aides turned to double agents. Hidden microphones, deleted CCTV footage. A silent revolt was underway, and the question wasn't just who leaked it, but why. It began with whispers. A hushed conversation between two junior staffers overheard by a footman on night duty. A line spoken too loud, a glance held too long. Then came the signs, the sudden reassignment of a long-time aide, the locked cabinets that once stood open, and a stream of encrypted messages traced to a palace IP. It was clear. The walls were no longer holding. The leak of the Charlotte document wasn't a breach. It was a message. And it came from inside. What no one expected was the extent of the fracture within the royal household. The staff had quietly split into factions. Those aligned with Camilla, the traditionalists, the loyalists, the ones who saw her as the crown's stabilizer, and those who saw in Catherine and Charlotte not just modernity, but redemption. It wasn't politics. It was belief. Belief in legacy, in symbolism, in the idea that the next face of the monarchy had to mean something more than survival. Those loyal to the old order found themselves outnumbered by those ready to welcome a new one. Investigations launched swiftly. Devices were seized, hard drives wiped. A trail of messages, some deleted too late, pointed toward a calculated effort not to destroy, but to expose. The leak wasn't impulsive. It was surgical. Internal intelligence suggested that communications had been intercepted for weeks, and there was even speculation of an encrypted dossier titled Her Rightful Path, compiled long before the document ever reached the press. The implications were staggering. Someone or several someones had known about the succession shift well before it became official, and they had planned for the world to know. The deeper the palace dug, the murkier it became. A senior advisor, just 3 weeks shy of a royal promotion, handed in a sudden resignation. No explanation. No exit interview. Gone. Vanished from palace grounds. Rumors flared that this advisor had been the linchpin of the leak, the silent courier who coordinated the operation with chilling precision. But when questioned, no one would speak his name. It was as if loyalty had become its own form of rebellion. One aide, finally breaking under pressure, confessed in a closed-door inquiry. But the future isn't hers. That statement alone, 5 words, rattled the investigation. It wasn't just betrayal from within. It was a shift in allegiance that could not be undone. Lines had been drawn in marble, not sand. And now, even the most sacred institutions, those built to endure secrecy, were bleeding information. Then came the threat that shook the palace to its core. If the shift wasn't formally acknowledged, key staff would walk. Not 1, not 2, dozens. The potential exodus would leave ceremonial functions paralyzed, press operations disabled, and royal security exposed. The monarchy wasn't just facing scandal, it was facing internal collapse. And the message was clear: this was no longer about the crown alone, it was about who the crown truly belonged to. Even as the palace tried to control the damage, a powerful figure stepped forward, one who hadn't spoken in years. For days, he said nothing. Then, flanked by royal advisors, Prince William stepped into the press room and uttered one sentence that silenced the nation. I think fought. There was no ceremony, no preamble, just quiet tension and held breaths as the heir to the throne delivered a statement that would split history into a before and after. The silence preceding it wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. William had watched the chaos build, had read the headlines, had seen the institution buckle under the weight of uncertainty. And while others scrambled for control, he stood still. He waited for the right moment, not to react, but to lead. Because William wasn't just defending the document, he was affirming the future it represented. His words were measured but heavy, carrying the weight of generations. And though he never named names, the subtext rang louder than any shout. It was a line drawn firmly through the sand, a veiled rebuke aimed with surgical precision at those who had clung to legacy without earning it. Camilla's camp, once buoyed by years of favor and royal compromise, now stood exposed. For William, it wasn't about titles or tradition, it was about intention, about who would carry the monarchy forward not because they were born to, but because they were ready to. Behind the scenes, It was Catherine who had helped shape the message. Together, they had crafted a statement that wasn't merely strategic, it was personal. William knew this wasn't just about the crown. It was about Charlotte. About the quiet strength she had shown in the face of impossible pressure, and about the kind of example he wanted her to see. Not a father afraid to speak, but a king in waiting who chose courage when silence would have been easier. Days before the address, William had taken Charlotte to visit the statue of Diana in the Kensington Gardens. No cameras, no aides, just the two of them, standing in the shadow of a woman who had once been denied a voice but left a legacy too powerful to silence. Witnesses nearby said William appeared reflective, even emotional. Some believe that moment was what sealed his resolve. Others say Charlotte asked him a simple question that cut to the heart: "Will they let me be me?" William didn't answer, but his speech days later did. And it wasn't just the content of his words, it was how he delivered them. Steady, clear, echoing the timeless cadence of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose silence always spoke volumes and whose rare words shifted history. In that moment, William wasn't echoing her style, he was stepping into it. And the monarchy, fractured and trembling, finally found its spine again. Political analysts and royal watchers agree. That single statement didn't just respond to the leak or support the document, it redefined William's role. No longer the dutiful prince following in his father's shadow, he emerged as the moral compass of the crown's next era. Not loud, but unshakable. Not performative, but precise. The kind of leadership that commands loyalty not through fear, but through trust. But while the public embraced William's stand, one royal outsider saw the writing on the wall and took drastic action. She was never meant to be queen, but she clawed her way to the throne. And now, as her lineage is pushed aside, Camilla faces the one decision she never anticipated: bow out gracefully, or fight for everything she's built. The walls around her were no longer fortified. Once surrounded by staunch allies and cushioned by decades of carefully earned influence, Camilla now found herself increasingly isolated. Whispers filled the air, but none reached her directly. Invitations slowed, advisors became vague, and when she entered rooms, conversations ceased just a moment too late. The energy had shifted, and for a woman who had fought tooth and nail to claim her place beside the crown, the silence was deafening. Behind every smile was suspicion. Behind every gesture, a betrayal waiting to be unmasked. But the silence didn't stay one-sided. Inside private quarters, behind locked doors, came the confrontation many believed would break them both. Charles and Camilla alone. The subject was unavoidable, the future of her grandchildren. Her voice, once so composed, reportedly cracked with desperation. "And what of my family?" she asked him. "Will they simply vanish?" But Charles had made his decision. He wasn't cruel. He was resolute. And that made the blow all the more unbearable. The crown had spoken through ink and intention, and Camilla's bloodline no longer held weight beneath its seal. What followed stunned even her most loyal staff. Camilla scheduled a rare, private audience with a national media outlet, no palace protocol, no handlers, but hours before the interview, it was abruptly cancelled. No explanation, no rescheduling. Just a single sentence issued through the press office: "Her Majesty will not be speaking at this time." But leaks emerged days later from within her inner circle, unverified, but chilling nonetheless. A handwritten farewell note had allegedly been drafted, not as a public letter, but a private one addressed only to her aides. "Thank you for helping me stand where I was never supposed to," it read. "But I cannot stand here anymore." Her struggle was no longer political, it was personal. Pride battled pain. Dignity warred with defiance. She had once said, in a rare moment of honesty, that her greatest fear was being remembered as a placeholder. And now, that fear was being carved into stone before her very eyes. With every headline, every royal silence, every photo op without her, Camilla's place seemed to shrink. She hadn't lost power. She had been excluded from its future. Then came the retreat. Mill House, the one place untouched by royal expectation, became her refuge. No public statements, no scheduled appearances, not even for events she had once insisted on attending. Inside those gates, she was no longer queen. She was a woman mourning relevance. And the vow whispered through staff corridors said it all. She would never again be seen at the palace balcony on royal occasions. Not out of protest, but because she knew, deep down, the monarchy had made its choice. And just when it seemed the monarchy had chosen its course, one final revelation rewrote everything once more. Hidden behind a false panel in a private study, a second document surfaced, one that doesn't just name Charlotte, but entrusts her with a mandate no child has ever received. The legacy of a crown, the weight of a future, the final word. It was uncovered not during a public audit or an organized search, but through quiet chance, an archivist seeking a misfiled correspondence in a room rarely touched since the Queen's passing. The moment the panel slid open and the folded parchment was revealed, the atmosphere shifted. Its parchment was aged, its ink steady, and the handwriting unmistakable. It belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. But this was no ordinary letter. This was something else entirely, something sacred, personal, unfinished. A relic of foresight from the monarch who had once carried the crown through some of the most volatile chapters in modern history. And this, it seemed, was her final act of guidance. The content was not legal, but emotional, reflective, a message written not to govern, but to remind. It described Charlotte in words that hadn't yet been spoken aloud in public. Natural grace, unwavering dignity, and a silent strength I once saw in myself. The document made no attempt to assign title or power. Instead, it framed Charlotte's future not as entitlement, but as stewardship. And in doing so, it reframed the monarchy itself not as a fortress of birthright, but as a vessel of earned trust. A new kind of royal future, one that did not demand loyalty, but inspired it. At the center of the letter was a list 10 principles for future rulers. The handwriting grew lighter halfway through the 8th. The last 2 were left blank. Some said this was intentional. Others believed she simply ran out of time. But whatever the reason, it felt deliberate. As if the Queen herself had passed the pen to Charlotte, trusting her to finish what history could not. That moment was sealed further when Princess Anne was asked to review the letter. Without hesitation, she confirmed its authenticity. Not only had she seen the draft decades earlier, but she'd witnessed the Queen revising it after a conversation with Charlotte during a family gathering that no one thought held significance until now. In a quiet moment shielded from the public eye, a private viewing of the letter was arranged. Only 3 were present: William, Catherine, and Charlotte. No aides, no press, just a family bound not only by blood, but by the gravity of what they now carried. It said that Charlotte read the final line aloud, voice steady, before folding the paper back with solemn care. Let her be the bridge, not the battleground. And with those final words, the torch passed without fanfare, but not without power. As the sun rises over the palace, the monarchy's future no longer lies in tradition, but in transformation. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.